This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacinta Thompson and I'm the Executive Director of the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre. Welcome to you all. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Kaurna land and that we pay respect and express our respect for the Kaurna people, their elders and ancestors, and acknowledge the spiritual and cultural relationship that they have with this land. I would like to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the University of South Australia and the Hawke Centre to the 2016 ARA Oration with the wonderful Sami Shah. A warm welcome, thank you. It's finally wonderful to have you in Adelaide for the first time and hopefully to see you back here for maybe the tour of South Australia. We are absolutely thrilled to be co-presenting this event with ARA, the Australian Refugee Association, and I would like to personally thank the ARA team, Lois Boswell, President, the ARA board members, CEO Kirsten Bickendorf, Cassie Megan, and all the wonderful staff. ARA is an extraordinary and much needed organisation, and we feel really proud, the Hawke Centre, to be partnering with ARA, have done a couple of years ago, and will continue at this really important partnership. The Hawke Centre is committed to delivering a diverse and free range of programs and exhibitions throughout the year that reflect our fundamental themes of strengthening our democracy, valuing our diversity, and building our future. The session tonight is being recorded, and a video and podcast will be available on the Hawke Centre website next week. So, with that, can I please ask that you switch your phones to silent, but please feel free to follow the Twitter conversation on the links behind me. I would now like to invite the MC for the evening, Jane Stinson. Jane is a Channel 7 senior news reporter and also a Welcome to Australia ambassador and a very passionate supporter of ARA. So thank you, Jane, for joining us tonight.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Jacinta. And I think we've had a few rounds of applause already. I think we really need to give a round of applause to UniSA because they have donated their time and this fabulous venue here this evening. And without them and their very generous free support to ARA, we wouldn't be here tonight. So thank you very much, Jacinta. And thank you to all of you for braving the terribly cold weather out there tonight. I'm sure you will find the environment in here much warmer, and it'll be warmer still when Sami Shah takes the stage to entertain you. As Jacinta mentioned, my name's Jane Stinson, and I'm a senior reporter and court reporter for 7 News. I'm also a Welcome to Australia ambassador, and Welcome to Australia is well supported by ARA, and we thank them very much for the support they provide Welcome to Australia. And I'm also on the board of JusticeNet, which many of you would be familiar with. It's an organisation that advocates for people who are going through our courts on immigration matters on a pro bono basis. So my acknowledgements to the work that JusticeNet does as well. Now, like many of you, I've got a passion for refugee rights issues, and like you, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Sami Shah as soon as possible. But first, we have a message from the Governor, who is, of course, the patron of ARA. So I'll put my best Governor's hat on now and try and do a very terrible job of impersonating him. But anyway, so this is a message from Hugh Van Lay, the Governor of South Australia, and he writes, "Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to provide some opening remarks through me this evening, and I apologise that I'm unable to join you due to a long-standing commitment. I congratulate the Australian Refugee Association on the success of the annual oration, which has become an extremely popular event. I'm proud to be a patron of this organisation and have delivered the inaugural oration 6 years ago. It's been my pleasure to watch the Australian Refugee Association go through many stages of transformation into a well-established organisation with a strong future. I have no doubt the audience will appreciate the talents of Sami Shah very much. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. And I think we just give him a clap because, you know, it's on the recording. He'll see it later. Now, I'd like to introduce first, though, Kirsten Bickendorf. Now, you would all know her as the CEO of ARA. That's a role that she's held for about 2 years. And she's also a graduate of the Governor's Leadership Foundation, so a nice link there back to the patron. Now, in the time that Kirsten's been doing this role, the profile of ARA has most certainly grown, and that's in large part due to her strong advocacy and the work at ARA. So please welcome, possibly the second brightest person in the room, Kirsten Bickendorf.
Yes, my hair has been completely upstaged by a jacket. Welcome to the annual ARA Oration on World Humanitarian Day. The oration has become an incredibly important platform for speakers to contribute to the national discussion about asylum seekers and refugees. And I too would like to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. It is important to remember that all non-Indigenous people are migrants to this land. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Jacinta and her extraordinary team. I remember my first ARA oration. It was at Elder Hall. It was cold, it was raining, very much like tonight. And this is just overwhelming for me to see such a huge turnout. Sami, this is obviously a lot to do with you, and I think we sold out in less than 48 hours. But your team has been extraordinary, and we couldn't do this without you, so thank you, Jacinta. I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing ARA staff, and I know that there's many of you here, and the volunteers that have helped make this evening possible. ARA has more than 400 volunteers, and they're actively involved in the everyday work that we do. So you go above and beyond all expectations, and I'm very blessed to work with you. Whilst refugees endure unimaginable difficulties and trauma in their journey to safety, they also hold an unshakable hope for a better future. They dream of peace, freedom, and the opportunity to realise their aspirations. Millions of people around the world have no choice but to flee their homeland, escape war, torture, and persecution. Behind the rhetoric of refugees and asylum seekers, there are real people, each with a unique and often tragic story to tell. At ARA, we see the real life stories of people who have left their homes, they've left their friends, they've left their families, and everything they know to escape violence, persecution, and even worse. I have a friend that came here as a refugee in 2009 from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Her journey was a difficult one. In her life, she lived in 3 refugee camps. She and her family walked from refugee camp to camp. In one of those camps, rebels stormed and tried to take her eldest sister. Her father put up an extraordinary fight, and they beat him, and they took him away. It was only after pressure from a family friend they were able to get their father returned. Then, after 9 years, she and her family were told that they would be settled in Australia, leaving in the next day or 2. Again, they had no idea where Australia was. And for that family, settling in Australia wasn't particularly easy. And she and I joke about this sometimes. It sounds silly, but you talk about things like toasters or television channels. They didn't know that there was more than one station on the TV. And this is the low-level stuff, and don't get us started about the microwave. But through the support of ARA and other organisations like Welcome to Australia, she and her family are absolutely flourishing. She speaks 4 languages, including English. Her father speaks 12. She's finished high school. She's studying a double degree in international development and business. She volunteers with ARA as a youth ambassador. She speaks in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. And just last year, she was awarded the Australia Day Award by the Governor himself, a former refugee. She's an extraordinary human being, and there are so many people like her in our community. So I am so proud to be the CEO of this extraordinary organisation. ARA started in 1975, and I know that there are a number of people in this room that were there on that first day. The organisation builds on the strengths and the resilience of the people that we work with. Our settlement services assist people to move forward in their new lives in Australia when it comes to finding a home, undertaking studies, gaining employment, making connections into the community, and developing a sense of belonging. The staff and volunteers at ARA are there every step of the way. And this is why tonight is so important. One of the simplest actions that you can take away is to go and have conversations with people. Tell them the real stories. Tell them about people like my friend. Meet somebody with a refugee background. You will grow richer. Your life will be much better for it. Break down the myths and rhetoric and tell the real stories of people that matter. And to top all of that off, thank you, Sami. We are so looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you for gracing us with your talents.
Now, Kirsten made a pretty good point there about getting the message out and sharing stories, and in this new age of social media, there's lots of ways you can do that. So I know you would have turned your mobile phones onto silent, but that doesn't mean that you can't tweet. So if you'd like to tweet some photos or even just relay to the wider public what you're hearing here and pass on some of those great messages, then make sure you use the hashtag ARA Oration, so that's hashtag ARA Oration, or the Twitter handle at AusRefugee, AUS Refugee. And we can spread the messages to all the people who haven't quite made it here this evening. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a fellow television journalist and also comedian and writer, Sami Shah. Now, Sami migrated to Australia in June 2012 because it was no longer safe to raise his family in their home country. Sadly, of course, that was Pakistan's loss, but it's certainly Australia's gain. Shah presents beautifully witty and insightful political comedy on our current social climate, delving into the Muslim religion, culture, and his new life as an atheist. As Pakistan's first stand-up comedian in a place where comedy clubs still don't even exist, woo, the light. If you thought it was bright before, it must be brighter now. Now, this was, of course, he was setting up as a comedian in a place where comedy clubs still don't even exist, and Shah held his first show to a sold-out room of over 300 people, so it's quite the draw card. He's since appeared in the New York Times, ABC's Australian Story, QI, the Tedx in Melbourne, and The Project. Now, after originally setting up in regional Western Australia, Shah has since moved to Melbourne, where he's jetted in from this evening. He regularly performs stand-up as well as penning a number of books, articles, and has recently added ABC radio to his repertoire. So without any further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Sami Shah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to start with a caveat. I was doing a show recently, and after the show, this gentleman came up to me, and he said something which I've heard a few times before, and I felt it was something that I should address up front from now on, which is he said that I really liked what you did, it was very funny, but I don't like immigrants criticizing Australia. And I will forewarn you, I will be criticizing Australia today. Some of those criticisms will be fairly harshly worded. And the thing is, I understand that man's point of view. I understand his gripe, if you will, because he was angry. He's like, why did you come here if you're going to shit on this place? And that's a very human response. I get that. But there are some justifications I can put forward. The first one is, I'm here because I love this place. I'm in Australia. I continue to live in Australia. And I hope to continue to live in Australia because I have a deep and abiding love for Australia. The criticisms are coming from a place of love. They mean that I want it to be better. So that's why I justify, how I justify it in my own head. The other thing is, when I was in Pakistan, and I used to criticize Pakistan there sometimes, they used to say, don't do it, it's unpatriotic. Then I left Pakistan and they said, don't criticize Pakistan because you're not here anymore. I came to Australia and they said, don't criticize Australia because you're an immigrant. And I've got friends who were born here, lived their entire life here, and when they say anything, they say, don't do that, you're being unpatriotic. And at some point, I realized the problem doesn't lie with the criticisms, it lies with the people listening to them. So let's hope that none of you have that problem tonight. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself, because I am an abiding narcissist. And there's nothing more empowering than just talking about yourself for 30 minutes in front of a room full of strangers. My name is Sami Shah. I'm from Pakistan. I used to be a comedian in Pakistan, and that always gets weird reactions. I was being interviewed by a journalist very recently for a newspaper article, and she said, oh, what did you do in Pakistan? And I said, I was a comedian there. And she said, oh, I didn't realize there was comedy in Pakistan. And I had to explain to her that laughter isn't a Western construct. You guys didn't come up with that one. But it's true, I started off in Pakistan. I used to do comedy over there. That wasn't what paid the bills. Comedy was something I did because I loved it. What paid the bills was journalism. I was a journalist as well. I worked for a 24-hour news channel in the city called Karachi. And for those of you who don't know, Karachi is a city. It's the biggest city in Pakistan. It's a city of 26 million people. Australia is a country of 24 million people. Karachi is a city of 26. When I first came here, someone was like, fuck off, we're full. I thought they were being sarcastic. I was like, I know, good one. What, really? Like, why? But took me a while to figure that one out. But it's a mad city. It's a city with terrorism and all these things, and insanity kind of happens there. And I was working there as a journalist. And I just started doing comedy on the side. And I had this moment in my life which kind of defined every moment since then, which is in December of 2008. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, returned to Pakistan after an 8-year exile. She'd been living abroad during the time that we had a military dictator, and she'd been there. And then she returned, and my news channel sent me to cover her arrival, along with the whole team of other journalists, because there was over 1.52 million people thronged to the airport to welcome Benazir Bhutto. And they were all there, and she was on this bus, and it's kind of procession kind of carrying her through the city. And she passed by me, I remember recording her, and then she moved a little bit further ahead, and as we were packing up our equipment to kind of relocate somewhere else, the first suicide bomber attacked. And 150 people ended up dying that day because it was one and then a second suicide bomber. And it was a very compressed place, a lot of people closely packed together. 150 civilians died. Benazir Bhutto survived that one. She ended up dying a few weeks later in another attack later. And I was the journalist on the scene, and I reached there. I was the first news person to get there, and I got there, I think, a few minutes after the attack had happened. And I remember seeing horrible things, grotesque things. Terrible things, and I had a weird reaction. Because, you have to understand, to be a comedian is a strange thing. It's not something that people naturally gravitate towards. I think to be a comedian means you're basically, I think I'm a paranoid narcissist, is what it is. I really, really want everyone talking about me, but I don't think anyone's saying anything nice. Like, that's how I survive. And so my brain goes to strange places. And I was standing there amongst human debris and looking around at everything, and my brain went to a strange place, and the place it went to was comedy. You see, because I started doing comedy in Pakistan a few months earlier, and every time in Pakistan, or in Karachi especially, you book a comedy show. What you do is you book an auditorium, something like this, and you sell tickets, everyone buys the tickets, and they come and you do the show. And every single time there'd be a terrorist attack or a suicide bombing somewhere else in the city, and then either out of just respect for the dead or out of fear for the safety of the people who were going to come to the show, you postpone the show, and you postpone the show, and you postpone the show. And I'd been doing that, and everyone had been doing that. The concerts had been doing that. The music people had been doing that. The actors in the theater plays had been doing that. And this was just one more attack. And I had a show coming up in a few days, 5 days later. And I was standing there amongst that carnage, and my first reaction was, well, I have to postpone the show, obviously. And then I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not going to postpone the show. And I got very angry, and I was like, I'm not going to. And it's a very selfish reaction. I understand that, and I appreciate that, but I want to point out where it came from. And it came from an area where I looked around, and I was like, what's the opposite of this? And the opposite of of horror to me is laughter. Because they both rely on the same impulse. One, they both rely on surprise. You're surprised and so you're frightened, or you're surprised and you laugh. That's the only difference. And so I was like, if in a world full of horror, I need to create laughter. I can't not. And I didn't postpone the show, and it was amazing. People came and they packed it out, and we all had that kind of laugh which you have after something terrible happens in your life, and you're kind of laughing. It was a healing laugh. It was a very strange laugh. I haven't heard that ever again. But I started doing comedy after that. I kind of committed to comedy very seriously. And I would have kept doing comedy in Pakistan for the rest of my life. I was happy living there. I had friends there and family there and everything. But a few things happened that kind of made me decide it's time to leave. The first thing that happened is I had a daughter. My daughter was born in 2009. And and you have a very different reaction, I think, when you have a daughter versus when you have a son. I have friends who have sons. And the way they describe it is when you hold your son, when you hold your baby boy, and you look down at him for the first time, you think, I am going to teach you to be a warrior and a poet. I'll teach you to be a gentleman and a scholar, and I'll teach you to fight for the things that are right, and I'll teach you to shelter those who need shelter, and I'll teach you to be brutal against those who deprive others of shelter. And I will teach you all these things because you are a man, and that is what you need to know. And it's different when you have a daughter. I think when you have a daughter, you hold your daughter and you think, I need to kill everyone else on earth so that you're okay. And that's honestly what it comes down to. I had a daughter and I was like, I don't want her growing up in Pakistan. I don't want her growing up here. I want her growing up in a better country than this. And so we applied for immigration to Australia. And the other reason being I was getting death threats at the time. And if it was just me, I wouldn't have cared. But the death threats came when I had a child. I didn't want her to have to kind of experience those things. I used to write articles and columns about politics and religion and government and everything. And over there, sometimes they don't take it nicely. And I had a journalist friend of mine who used to have the same response when he'd write. And I asked him, he'd been doing it for ages. I was like, they keep threatening my life. What do I do? He's like, well, the thing is, as long as they're writing, you're safe. It's when they stop writing, that means they're coming over now. That's when you worry. So I was like, all right, as long as they're writing, it's good. The last death threat I got wasn't even in Pakistan. The last death threat I got was when I was living in Australia. I'd moved to Australia. And I'll tell you the story really quickly. I was on Twitter one night. And I was just tweeting out some stupid joke. And the Taliban in Pakistan had threatened all the TV channels. They threatened all the TV channels, because the TV channels had been criticizing the Taliban, so the Taliban said that if there's one more criticism, we're going to attack the TV channels. So I was on Twitter, and I made a stupid joke, like, the Taliban complains about TV like old people saying that there's nothing good on TV anymore. Whatever, it's a dumb joke. And because this is the world we now live in, the official spokesperson for the Taliban is on Twitter. He's there, his name's Ehsanullah Ehsan, don't look him up. No, but he's there. His profile picture was him on a horse. I don't know if it's still the same thing. And so he was on Twitter, and he tweeted at me. I don't know how he saw it, but he tweeted at me. And he goes, yes, but our old people have exothermic reactions, which is suicide bomber reference. And I tweeted back, and I said, yes, but you haven't been around my grandfather when he has beans for breakfast. And then he tweeted and said, that's very funny. Why don't you come over here and tell us that joke in person? And I realized I'm now trading fart jokes with the Taliban. And that's not what you should do in life. But I was getting the death threats, and I had my daughter, and I was like, I need to move. I need to leave. I need to move to another country. So we applied for immigration to Australia, and they quickly processed the paperwork 3 years later. And no, here's the thing. I understand. It takes a while. I'm from Pakistan. My passport isn't a passport so much as it's a voucher for free rectal exams, redeemable in airports around the world. I recommend Singapore Airport. Small hands, moisturized, goes right in. It's leave you smelling of lemongrass. It's wonderful. But that was the thing. We applied for immigration and we came and even up until the end we weren't sure, like, should we leave or should we stay? And I kind of, because immigration is difficult. You have to say goodbye to everyone and everything, and you have to start your life over, and it's not easy. It's a frightening thing. But the one thing that kind of pushed me over the edge was I got held up at gunpoint. And the thing you have to understand is, in Karachi, everyone gets held up at gunpoint. It's so common that if you live in Karachi and you haven't been held up at gunpoint, it's because you're the guy holding the gun. Like, that's how it works. That's the law, I don't know. But my story is, I was driving home from work one day, and I stopped at a traffic light, and there was a knock on the window, and I rolled down the window, and this guy stuck a gun to my head, and he said, give me a phone, give me a wallet. And there's a protocol. You have to follow it. They will kill you. I know people who've died, friends of mine who are dead now, because they looked at the guy. You're not allowed to do that. So I looked down right away, and I took out my phone, I took out my wallet, and I handed it over. And he took the phone and wallet. And to this day, I don't know why, but he did this. He actually said this. He takes the phone and wallet, and he goes, I hope you're not angry with me. And because I'm an idiot comedian, my stupid comedy brain kicked in. And he said, I hope you're not angry with me. And I said, you've got my phone, you've got my wallet, leave me my anger. And he started laughing. And because he started laughing, I started laughing. We both started laughing. And then he stopped laughing. And then because he stopped laughing, I stopped laughing. And we looked at each other. And we kissed. And no, no. Sorry. That's the dumbest joke I'll do all night, I promise. No, what actually happened is even stranger. What actually happened is he gave me the phone and wallet back. That never happens. That does not happen. He gave me the phone and wallet back. And I was very confused. I was like, why are you doing this? And he said this, I'll never forget. He said, look, this is what I have to do. I'm a thief. If I don't do this, they kill me. But I'm not going to do this to you because you're a good guy. And he walked away. And I think what happened, it took me a long time to kind of parse together what took place, and I've only recently figured it out. My theory is that what happened is laughter broke the facade. There's a facade that's created, which is he's a thief, I'm a victim. And we laughed, and because laughter is a human response, all of a sudden he saw me as a human. He could not see me as a human. And he couldn't bring himself then to do that to another human being. Either that or he's the worst judge of character ever. I don't know what I prefer, but still. So we applied for immigration and we flew straight to Australia. The dream was to move to Melbourne because the thing is, like, every year Economist magazine comes out with their rankings. This year, apparently Melbourne's #1 most livable city. At the time, it was #2 most livable city. #1's never Sydney, so haha, we don't care. Melbourne was #2 most livable city that year, and Karachi was #2 least livable city. And I was like, if I'm going to upgrade, I'm going all the way. Like, that's. So we moved. The dream was to move to Melbourne, and except that the immigration department, in their infinite wisdom, gave me a visa that is a regional state-sponsored visa. And what that does is it means you can live in Australia, but you have to spend the first 3 years living and working in regional Western Australia. And what that means is that you get to live in Australia, but you also get to feel like you never left a third world country in the first place. Easing you into the system, I guess. No, it was a bizarre thing, because we moved into this small town called Northam, which is 2 hours from Perth. And when I moved to Northam, they just opened up the Yonga Hill Immigration Detention Center on the outskirts of Northam, which is a massive detention center with 600 refugees and asylum seekers from Pakistan and Afghanistan and countries like that. And there was me walking around town looking like this. And every time I go to Woolies, they'd be like, oh my God, one of them got out! Like, just don't make eye contact. Like, they called the police twice on me in Woolies, and the second time I had to go, I'm like, what do you think my plan as a refugee would be? Escape the detention center, then go shopping at Woolies? Like, why would I not go to Perth instead? Anyway. But I had weird interactions there, because that's when I didn't know about the refugee issue as such in Australia at the time. I came to Australia and I moved to Northam, and the detention center opened, and locals in town were freaking out about the detention center. And this one woman came up to me, and I'll never forget, she came up to me and she goes, what if one of them escapes? And I was like, what? And she goes, what if one of them escapes? What do we do? And that's when I first realized Australians don't understand refugees and asylum seekers. Right? Because the politicians will tell you many different things, because the truth is never in a politician's advantage. They will always make up things or whatever. I am a comedian. It doesn't get matter. My invoice has been sent already. I'll tell you the truth. The truth is, these people who risk their lives to come here, these are the good guys. These are doctors and lawyers and physicians and teachers. These are good guys escaping shitty countries where the bad guys won. So when this woman's panicking, like, what do we do when they escape? What do I do? I was like, I don't know. Invite them in. They might teach you how to read and fix your fucking teeth. Give that a shot. Just try it. But they're taking our jobs. I hear that one a lot. The refugees are going to take our jobs. What do we do? Be better at your job. If a guy who spent 2 weeks on a boat, lost half his family on the trip over, then spent 3 years in Nauru and cannot speak the language, can take your job away from you. Upgrade your LinkedIn profile. Try that. I don't know. But there's a lot of language around it. That's what they do. The politicians will confuse you with a lot of language and everything. And so they'll say things like, oh, they're queue jumpers. They're jumping the queue. And I have to tell people, there's no queue. There's no orderly lines forming outside the borders of Australia. There's no, and even if there were, Australia's an island continent. Where would those lines be forming? In the ocean. What would they stand on? On fucking boats. That's how it works. But people don't get it. The other defense that's thrown up regularly is that, you know, we don't want to see them dying in the ocean. We don't want to see the people dying in the ocean on the boats here. And the thing you have to point out is that when you push them back, they're not dying in your ocean, but they'll go die somewhere else. Just because you don't see them die doesn't mean they didn't die. They're not Schrodinger's refugees. They're refugees. And that's just an argument that has to be made. There's just, why don't they come in through the front door? Why? That's one. Why do they come through the other routes and stuff? And you have to explain things like, if someone's stabbing you, and you're running down the street, and there's someone with a knife, and he's trying to stab you in the neck, and he's coming after you, he's right behind you, and you're running, and you run into a police station, you're like, this guy's trying to stab me. The policeman can't then turn around and say, you know what, go back outside, you shouldn't have come into the front door, go home, put an application online, wait 3 to 5 years, we'll process it, we'll get back in touch with you. Like that's how ridiculous the argument becomes. But I didn't know all these things until I came to Australia, until I kind of got thrust into the refugee debate as well, because it was just the national debate that's been happening. And I think a large portion of it, which doesn't get said enough, is that it's a racial issue. Because queue jumpers, asylum seekers, boat, that's a lot of syllables to not say brown. Right? Because let's be honest, if a boat full of Irish refugees washed up in Bunbury tomorrow, we'd all be like, oh my God, they have freckles and red hair and they speak in limericks, let's make them baristas and pay them in cash. Like that's how it works. And I didn't realize the racism thing until I moved to Australia as well. That was the other thing. People warned me about it, by the way. I have friends in Pakistan and they warned me about a few things about Australia. They said, don't go to Australia, there are snakes there. I was like, I'm from Karachi, there are suicide bombers there. Unless the snake comes up to me and explodes, I think I can handle it. And the other thing they said, all Australians are racist. Everyone said that, all Australians are racist. And I don't believe that. I don't. I believe to say that all of anyone is anything is somewhat racist in and of itself. I think, but I understand where the stereotype comes from. I'm not a Muslim, I'm sorry. I'm not a Muslim anymore. I was born a Muslim, I grew up a Muslim, and then I stopped being a Muslim. One of my friends, he's religious, he asked me, he's like, why did you stop believing in a religion? And I had to explain to him the only answer I could give him, which is the only honest answer, but it sounds condescending, I realize. Because he said, why are you not religious? And I said, it's because I'm a grown-up. And the thing is, thank you, but that is it, I stopped being a Muslim. But I understand, I grew up a Muslim, and I know what it's like to be a Muslim. I know what it's like to have people think that all Muslims are terrorists. That 1.5 billion people are terrorists. And it's a ridiculous assertion because that means if there are 1.5 billion terrorists, that they would have won. We would all be eating halal all the time. Like that's it. But Realistically speaking, and the Pew Research Institute did a study on this, and they found out it's 0.00625%. That's a 0.00625% of all Muslims qualify as terrorists. I mean, there's still like 1.1 million terrorists, a fuckload of terrorists, but what happens is that tiny percentage colors the rest of it because of how loud and disgusting and obnoxious they are. And so they make the rest of the Muslims look bad. And I think the same thing with racism in Australia. I think it's just a percentage of Australians who are racist, like something like 73%, or just ballparking it there. Sorry. But that's what it is, because what happens is, just in the Muslim community, I believe that the onus falls on the Muslims to then do something about the violent people in their community. The onus falls on the rest of Australia to do something about the racist ones, because they make you look bad. They make awkward conversations. I was in that WA town. I had to get a job briefly in that town I was in, and I was working as a comedian. I used to drive to Perth 2 hours every day and do comedy and drive back. And it took a while before I could earn enough money to offset the price of just the drive down. So I got a job I went to the newspaper in town. It was a small town, 5,000 people, mostly farmers. And there was one newspaper, and I went to the newspaper and I said, hey, I can be your journalist. And they said, we have one. And I was like, now I have to wait for him to die, like it's a whole thing. So instead I got the only other job I could find, which is I got a job working for the Brethren community. Everyone knows what the Brethren are? A few people shaking their heads. The Brethren, for those of you who don't know, are a Christian conservative, the word cult gets bandied about sometimes. They're basically, they don't watch TV, they don't listen to music, they don't use the internet, they don't do any of those things. They're a very secretive community. Kevin Rudd, when he was Prime Minister, said that the Brethren are a community that needs further investigation. And then they donated a few $1 million to his campaign, and he said that the Brethren are a cornerstone of Australian society, which should tell you everything you need to know about Australian politicians. And so I got a job with the Brethren. Basically what happens is the Brethren don't use the internet and all those things, but they have businesses, and they're very successful businesses. And those businesses have websites, and people apply for the business to, like build a shed or whatever through the website that comes in as an email that the Brethren can't read, so they hired me to read the email for them. So that's how I did that for a while. I read Brethren email. And then I realized what was happening was that some of the Brethren men were having affairs with non-Brethren women who were sending them sexy emails. But they couldn't read it because Jesus hates the internet, but not adultery. And so I had to read out the emails, and then I wrote Brethren porn. It's disappointingly similar to regular porn, all I want to say. But I knew there was going to be trouble in the job, because my first day there, I get to the job, and I open the fridge to take my lunchbox out. During lunch, I open the fridge, and my tiffin is there, take it out. And this guy walks up to me, and he points to my lunch, and he goes, I bet that's curry. And that thing happens where someone says something, but your brain isn't fast enough, and then you go home, and then 2 hours later, you're like, oh shit, this would have hurt his feelings. Like, this is the only time in my life I said the right thing at the right time. I nailed it. I was proud of myself because he walked up and he pointed at my food and he goes, I bet that's curry. And I said, ha, I get it, because I'm brown. Brown people don't eat curry. And then I pointed at his food and I said, I bet that's a dick. So I didn't last in that job very long. But the other thing that happened was, on my first few days there, I was talking to a guy in the office, and he said, he asked me, he's like, how long have you been in town? I was like, just a few weeks. He's like, oh, it's a really beautiful town, you should get out and see it. I was like, yes, I really want to explore it some more. What do you recommend? And he started telling me, he's like, oh, there's a park, you should go there, this beautiful park. It's over the hill, the river runs through it, and it's a really pretty park. And I go there on the weekends sometimes. I take a bottle of wine with me, and I sit under a tree, and I read a book there because none of the niggers go there. And I was like, what? Sorry? And he continued like that. And he's like, oh, there's another park, and it's around the corner from that one. And you go there, I take my kids there on the weekends because they got like the climbing bars and the swings and the slides. And, but on the weekdays, the niggers go there. And I had to say something. I couldn't not. And I was like, I'm sorry, I need to stop you. You can't say that. You can't say that word. That's a racist word. You can't say it. And he turned around and he said, oh, I don't mean it in a racist way. And that's when I realized that Australians don't understand racism, right? Because what happens is that the language around racism and the conversation around racism isn't defined by the victims of racism. It's defined by the people who are perpetuating the racism. And so when he says, I don't mean in a racist way, how do you counter that argument? And the way you counter it, and the way you have to kind of teach people to counter that, is that you're not the one who gets to decide. The victim gets to decide that. Racism is a lot like stabbing someone. Right? If I start stabbing you in the chest and just stabbing you, and then you're like, oh my God, you're hurting me, I can't then turn around and say, no, I'm not, get over it, no, it's not being a circle. Like that's your decision on whether or not I'm stabbing you, not mine. And it's the same way. And I used to have these discussions. I used to go out and I used to talk to people about these things. And then people have weird reactions because I'd talk about it and then go like, oh, you hate white people. And that's not true either. It's not. I'm not racist towards anyone. I don't hate white people. I love white people. White people are amazing. You do amazing things that no one else does because you think you live forever for some reason. You will honestly, like surfing. Only white people surf now. There are sharks in the water. The rest of us are like, fuck that, we're not doing this. And you guys just keep going back in, and every time a shark eats you, you're horrified. How? He died? What happened? A shark? Why? Like, no, that's why we don't do it. Like that. All the brown people are sitting in the car at the beach, waving. But that's exclusively a white thing. Brown people don't do recreational death. We have too many other ways to die to add that to the list. It's not a thing. But it gives you achievements. It makes you do incredible things. I think you build awesome things and you achieve great. Like Mount Everest. The Sherpas were a local community of people who lived under the shadow of Mount Everest for 1,000 years. And every morning the Sherpas would leave their huts and they would step outside and they would look up and they would go, fuck no. And then a white guy came along and he's like, that's white, I'm white, we're doing this. And he did it. That's what's so amazing about that, but that's why when you do die, you're always horrified. You have no idea how to deal with it. In WA this happened. When I moved to WA in 2012, they'd had 8 fatal shark attacks in 10 months. 8 fatal shark attacks in 10 months. And the government was confused. They're like, why are all these white people dying? What do we do to stop it? And they announced, I'll never forget this, the WA government announced, if there's one more fatal shark, you can look this up in the newspapers, there's one more fatal shark attack, we will take sharks off the endangered species list. Which was amazing to me, because I didn't realize that being on the endangered species list is dependent upon good behavior. They thought they were negotiating with Iran or something, I don't know. But see, the thing is, I've done this material, and I've done these jokes in towns across WA, because I was there for 4 years. I ended up living there for 4 years. I only moved to Melbourne 6 months ago. And I went to small towns across Western Australia. They used to invite me. I'd go there, towns of like 150 people, where the entire town would come out, because there's not much else to do. And it'd be great. Like, it'd be me in the town hall with the entire town, from the grandchildren to the grandparents to everyone in between. And there'd be a guitar amplifier and a microphone. And I'd do my jokes and my stories and everything. And then afterwards, they would invite me to stay the night at this lovely old lady's house every time. It'd be always a lovely old lady. I'd go and spend the night. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, is she making stew? Like, I think I'm going to be cooked. And then I'd leave. But I went to all kinds of towns across WA. And I performed this material. And I stopped after a while. I did it for 2 years. At the end of the 2 years, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. It's not making any difference, because you look at the way refugee treatment's happening in Australia and the way things keep going, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you start realizing that you're not making any dents. You're not having any effect. And so I stopped. I was like, I'm just as useless as everyone else. And then I went back to those towns 2 years later, because I came out with a book and I needed to promote it. And so the same towns kind of booked me again, and I went back to the towns. And it was a weird thing. Every town I went to, people in those small towns in rural Western Australia had signed up for refugee rights groups or volunteered for refugee groups and advocacy and things like that. And it's a strange... But for me, it was that thing. I was like, why is this working? Because people have been talking to them now for years and years. I'm not new. Anything I'm saying isn't new. It's the same thing that 1,000 people have said it better and more times than I ever could. And I think partly it's because, entirely actually, it's because of comedy. I think because when you say something with laughter, people lower their defenses. When the defenses are down, you have a better chance of penetrating their heart with the truth. And I think that's what worked. And I think that's important. Now, I'm going to start shifting towards the slightly more speechy, ranty part of the show, where I've written some things down. So forgive the tone shift. But a tone shift is what it's about, by the way, because I don't know if anyone saw this in WA yesterday. Colin Barnett, the Premier of WA, announced that he wants WA to take the Manus Island refugees and asylum seekers. Now, the cynical, practical part of me knows that that will never happen. The federal government will never let that come to pass. But you don't understand how big a deal this is. Colin Barnett is a politician. Politicians are by nature, they're consensus-based creatures. They don't fart without a public poll telling them that right now is the good time to fart. That's how they live their lives. And for Colin Barnett to do this and say this means that his public, his voting population, has now signaled to him that enough with the cruelty and the mistreatment of refugees. And that's a big deal for WA. WA does not have tone shifts. WA does not move very fast. WA is just now discovering this edgy new band, AHA, with their hit single, Take On Me. Like, that's where WA is in its development cycle, and they're ready to take this leap. That's a big deal. And the problem that keeps happening is every time I'd go to these towns and I'd do these talks, and then when I went back to the towns and I'd meet all these people, they'd all sign up and everything. And then the problem I found was they'd sign up to help, but that help would then be futile or wasted. And that's my biggest gripe, is right now, that there's a woman I met in one of the towns, and she came up to me and she was talking and she was like, oh, I've signed up for this thing, and I was like, that's lovely, thank you so much, it means a lot to me that you've done that, to help with refugees. And she said, hey, I have a question. I was like, sure. She asked, there's all these people, every time I go to Perth, there are rallies happening, and you go on the internet and there's all these newspapers and everyone is fighting for the refugees. Why hasn't anything happened yet? Why isn't it effective? And that word stuck with me, effective. Like, why are we so ineffective? What's happening? Why isn't anything we're doing making a difference? Why is the other side winning? And for me, the example of that was Brisbane with Baby Asha. I don't know if you remember the Baby Asha story in Brisbane, where the doctors basically, and that's the important detail, the doctors risk their careers and imprisonment by not letting Baby Asha go back to Nauru and fighting to keep her in the community. Now here's the problem though. That's a very huge achievement and they deserve all the credit. They didn't get much of it though. The credit went to, and if there's Greens Party here, people here, I'm sorry, the credit went to the Greens Party. The credit went to the asylum seeker groups in Brisbane who were outside holding rallies and holding candles and things and building signs, and they got the credit. They didn't do anything. The people who did the work, the only people who had any tangible effect in changing Baby Asha's life were the doctors. And they never got that credit. And you see the same thing again right now with the Nauru case files. There are people who are risking professional careers, risking imprisonment by leaking that information. That information is the only thing that has had a tangible effect in changing the minds of Australians in the last 4 years in a significant way. For WA to turn around and say this, that's a direct result of the Nauru case files. What it isn't a result of is refugee rallies. What it isn't a result of is candlelight visuals. What it isn't a result of is fucking hashtags. It's got nothing to do with any of that. When I was in Northam, in that town, a refugee rights group contacted me. They're like, hey, we're having a huge rally outside the Yonga Hill Detention Center. We want you to come and speak at that. And I said, I'd rather not. I just want to come and look. I just want to come and observe. And they're like, fine. And I got there. And when I reached so it's outside the detention center. The Yonga Hill Detention Center is massive. You can look it up on Google Earth. It's a huge, state-of-the-art, high-tech prison with several layers of walls and wires and things. It's an astounding building. It looks like a spaceship has landed on the outskirts of the town. And there was all these refugee rights people outside, and they set up tents, and they had a sausage sizzle going, and there was a drum circle, obviously, and all of these things are happening. There's all these young people who are there, and they kind of chant, and they'll chant, and then they make out at night, and so I found out from friends inside. I was like, because half the town worked in the detention center. And half the town, because they worked in the detention center, ended up having a great deal of empathy and sympathy for the detainees in that center. Because they met them on a daily basis, and they were Serco staff or HMS staff and things like that, and they'd go to work every day, and they knew these refugees and asylum seekers, they knew their stories, and they knew the information, and they had empathy for them. When I asked these refugee rights people, I'm like, why aren't you in town? They're like, oh, they're Bogans. We're not going to talk to the Bogans. And that's a big part of the problem. Who are you talking to? What are you saying? And that was evident over there. When I asked my friends, I was like, do the refugees inside know that these people are out here protesting in their favor? And they said, no, they have no idea. This place is a mile long. They can't hear them. So I went back out and I was like, hey, these guys have no idea what you guys are doing in there, what you guys are doing out here. You should relocate to some place where they can maybe hear you and see you. They're like, cool, we'll do that. So they went up to the top of a hill. And on top of the hill, they started chanting down, we'll get you out, we'll get you out. When you're a mile away and the wind's carrying some of the words, all you're hearing is get out, get out. I'm not even making this up. The refugees were inside the detention center going, what further punishment will you give us? We're already in here, how can we get out now? Like, why are you throwing us out? They made it, and I went back and told them, and they said, well, the thing is, it was anyway for morale boosting. And they went back into Perth and they all clapped themselves on the back. And I'm sick of that answer, morale boosting. Every single time I go to any rally, I go to anything, it's people just doing morale boosting. And nobody cares about effectiveness. Nobody cares about doing the things that make a difference. Do something worthwhile. Start cold calling programs. People ask me, they're like, okay, what can we do? I'm like, okay, fine, put the money together. Put all the money, every single refugee rights group in Australia gets all its volunteers to donate money, put the money together, buy primetime advertising space during the biggest footy games, and run commercials then. That's when everyone in Australia will see it. Start cold calling programs. All the politicians and political advocacy groups do this. They cold call different people in different voting blocks. So if you want to target that politician's voting block, start calling all his volunteers, start calling all his voters and telling them why they need to vote against him or what they need to tell their politician. This is an important one. Start having more diverse people in your refugee rights groups. Where are the brown people? Where are the Asians? Where are the black people? Every refugee rights group I go to, present company accepted, is run by a white man. And most of them are running on donations, and almost all of them have sexual assault stories that are being covered up. And this is a fact that I know from talking to many volunteers. They talk to me because I'm the guy that those guys who run those groups won't talk to anymore, because I've asked them about these questions. Every single major refugee rights group in Melbourne and Sydney and these places has a white guy on top who's got either wrongful termination cases running against him, or sexual harassment cases running against him, and the money that he's using, that he's getting as people donate for refugee treatment, is being used to pay off these cases. This will have an effect. One day these stories are going to break out, and they're going to hurt our side of the argument more than anything else has. Stop it right now. It's doable. Ask your own refugee rights group, show me the money I sent you. I gave you money, where's it being sent? Who's using it? What's it being used for? How effective is that money? And that's the biggest thing. Keep asking how effective it is. And if they're saying right now we're trying this, say, cool, I want to see results. What's the proof that this is effective? If it isn't effective, let's never do it again. Let's do something else. And if that isn't effective, let's do something else. Let's keep trying things until something is effective. Because right now we're not making the changes we need to be making. Things are going to get a lot worse. I'm a cynical person in the best of situations, and this is a cynical situation right now. That lady laughs at the weirdest times. No, but it's true. The thing is, it is going to get worse. It's not going to get better for a while. Europe is going to go bug shit. Europe is not Europe for you is very different from Europe for me. Europe for you is a place you send your kids to backpack through. Brown people don't backpack. We don't turn up in strange countries and go, I'm here now. Like, that's not a privilege we have. And that is something. Europe's going to close its doors. Europe is a xenophobic place. Middle East is going to go worse. Think about it. The Taliban was terrible, but they weren't even as bad as Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was terrible, and they're not even as bad as ISIS. There's going to be another one. And we don't know how bad they'll be, but they will be worse. We know these things. Trump probably won't win in America this time. But the next time, there'll be someone even worse, and he might win. And these things are going to happen. There's a drum beat you can hear. And I think the last time we heard this was in the 1900s, in the first decade of the 1900s. And it led to wars. And I think we're back at that phase right now, where you have that everyone I talk to, all these people I talk to who are futurists or people whose job it is to predict what's going to happen in the economy or what's going to happen in politics, they all feel like we're marching towards something, and it's going to get bad. And Australia's in a unique position in that situation. Australia's in a position where you can isolate yourself from the problems of the world, or you can choose how much you want to get involved. And what you do with those situations, how you treat the people running from those situations, all the asylum seekers who are going to increase in number and they're going to find more closed doors, you can either hit them with a bloodied fist, or you can shelter them with an open hand. And that's a choice Australia has to make. But it's a choice Australia isn't willing to make right now. A lot of what I do and what I've tried to do and will keep trying is to dispel the myths around this. That's something that doesn't come up as in explanations. It's the answer to a lot of questions people have. Why don't they stay in the countries? That's one of the things. Why don't they stay in the countries that they're passing through? Why do asylum seekers and refugees come all the way to Australia? You need to have answers. You can't just say you're a racist bogan. That is a response too many of us give too often. You've got to engage. The best conversation I had was with someone who was dead against refugees coming to Australia. And I sat down with him and I was like, why are you against it? And he explained it to me in a way I found very difficult to argue with, which is what you want to hear. He said, look, I don't have much. I'm a middle-income guy. I will always be a middle-income guy. I'm never going to be rich. I know the politicians are going to fuck me. I know the government's going to fuck me. I know the corporations are going to fuck me. I know the economy is going to fuck me. But I've got a house. I've got kids who go to a good school. I've got a car I like. I watch TV. I have these things. I don't want anyone else coming here now and those things diminishing even further. And that's a very difficult thing to argue against. Someone just wanting to maintain a simple lifestyle. You can argue that your lifestyle is luxuriant compared to people in third world countries. You can argue all those things. And they're like, that's fine. I just want what I have. I want to hold on to it. It's a very human response, a very human need. And this guy, he asked me, he's like, well, why don't they stay in the other countries? And you have to explain things then. You have to break it down. You have to say, well, the reason why they don't stay in the other countries is because Thailand, for example, or Malaysia, these countries that they pass through aren't signatories of the UN Refugee Convention, and therefore, there's no place that they can stay. They can come there on a tourist visa. That's an important thing. A lot of people don't realize that visas are an issue. You can't get, I'm going to Bali, hopefully, in October. I'm not a Australian citizen yet, so I still have a Pakistani passport. I'm going to Bali in October for Writers' Festival. I have to apply for the visa 1 month in advance. I might not get it. I was supposed to come to Australia in 2008 for a comedy festival. I didn't get my visa. Those things happen. If you are a young woman from a third world country of marriageable age, you will not get a visa to Australia. A tourist visa, a work visa, any of those things. You have a better chance of getting that if you're an Islamic fundamentalist male. And it's true. So there are these challenges, and people don't know that. There's people in this room right now who work in refugee rights things and didn't know this basic fact. I can assure you that visas are a challenge. My parents just came to visit me, and they spent 3 months applying for the visa. Their passport was at the Australian embassy for 3 months, and it was a 50-50 chance, and we lucked out that they got to come and see me. That is how it is. And the reason why that knowledge isn't there is because there aren't enough actual refugees, aren't enough actual minorities working in the refugee rights groups. You need more people with a diverse background because they've got the experiences to rebut arguments that other people will make. And so I told this man, I was like, if these people go to Thailand or Malaysia, they get sold into sexual slavery, or their every meal is a charity that they will receive, and their every day alive is a blessing that they have gotten from the corrupt authorities who are there. And the only reason they come to Australia, or they try to come to Australia, the only reason they've kept trying to do this is because Australia is seen as a shining example of Western secular humanist values. The only people who believe that right now are the refugees and asylum seekers hoping to come to Australia. It's the only thing that they have in common with Tony Abbott, with John Howard, with Andrew fucking Bolt. Like, that's the point of comparison between those two groups, is that they both believe in the betterment and in the higher values of Australia. But the problem is that we know that those higher values are a bit of a farce. There was the first time I ever did a refugee rights event, it was the Greens Party held an event in Perth. They asked me to MC it, and I went there. Julian Burnside was going to be there. So I was excited. I wanted to meet Julian for the first time. I went to the event. And before Julian got up to speak, there was a Noongar gentleman, which is the local Aboriginal tribe there, and a Noongar gentleman got up and did the welcome to country. Very elderly man, wonderful man, and he did it. His wife was there, who I had drinks with later. She's the funniest, oldest lady on the planet. And after he did the welcome to country, he and his wife came and sat down next to me. And Julian started his speech. And halfway through the speech, Julian Burnside said, and this was in 2012, so coming up to the next election, basically. And Julian Burnside said that in Australia's history, no government has ever run an election based on a policy of advocating cruelty. And the Indigenous gentleman next to me raised his hand, and his wife started laughing hysterically. She was so rock and roll, I miss her. And he started telling, he's like, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, every generation for the last 200 years of my people has been a subject of that cruel governmental policy that was a part of an election platform. How can you say this? And that's the key thing. Every time something happens in Australia, with the Nauru files right now, with Baby Asha before, every time some story comes out, every time there's a leak, we all turn around and say, and I keep hearing the same refrain again and again, this isn't us, this isn't Australia. But you can't say that anymore. You can't keep saying that because it's not true. That lie of this isn't us, this isn't Australia is the poison in the heart of Australia that's going to end up hurting or maybe killing Australia later. And you just have to deal with the truth to get that poison out and accept that this is us, but it shouldn't be us. This is us with every generation of Indigenous person in Australia. This is us with the kids in Dawndale. This is us with the kids in Nauru. This is us with the people who've committed suicide on Manus. This is us with the people who committed suicide on Christmas Island. This is us. But it doesn't have to be us any longer. And that's all. Thank you. There's an epilogue I like to do, which I usually do some more stand-up and everything, but usually it doesn't get this serious either. And I just want to reiterate one thing, which is that I wouldn't be saying these things if I didn't want Australia to be better. I want my daughter to grow up here. In Pakistan, well, it's a little-known thing. The Pakistani passport requires you to sign something to get the passport. You know, when your passport expires, you get a new renewed passport. There's a religious community in Pakistan called the Ahmadis. And they're a Muslim community who don't believe in the finality of the Prophet Muhammad. And so the rest of the country has declared their existence illegal. And so there's still a community who live there. They're persecuted, they're killed regularly for their beliefs. And to get a passport, you have to sign something that says you agree that the Qadianis and Ahmadis, which is what their other name is, are illegal and do not have a right to live in Pakistan. And so it's the only country in the world that requires you to sign this to get a passport. And one of the reasons, the important reasons why I wanted to leave was I didn't want my daughter to have that moral choice on her hands. And right now the moral choice that she's going to have growing up is that her taxpayer money is going to fund all of this. And I just don't want that anymore. Thank you.
I don't really think that was a good enough clap, actually. Let's give Sami Shah a big round of applause. Now, if you'd like to find out more about Sami Shah or to hear more of his pearls of wisdom, you can always buy his book. It's an autobiography called I'm Migrant, and he's also written a novel called Fireboy, and those are available from all good bookstores. Of course, being a paranoid narcissist, he'll of course be really thankful for that plug, but he'll spend the rest of the night worried that you won't actually like the books. So please go out and buy them. Now, it's time for a few more thank yous now, so I'd like to welcome Cassie Magan to come up here, please. Now, we'd like to say a very special thank you, of course, to Jacinta Thompson for the generosity of the Hawke Centre, so thank you very much, the Hawke Centre and UniSA. And of course, one of the brightest people in the room, Kirsten Bickendorf, thank you very much for all your hard work and your team's hard work this evening. Oh, there you go. I'm sure it's the coat that did it. Thank you. Now, if you'd like to support the work of ARA, there's lots of ways you can do that. Obviously, you can keep on tweeting and social mediaing and keeping an eye on what ARA is doing through those avenues. But you could also, if you're a bit fitness inclined, join the City to Bay team. It's called Amble for ARA, and you can get online on the City to Bay page and sign up and come for a run with us all. You can also donate and volunteer, and you can find out more information about that at the website AustralianRefugee.net. And if you're into the arts, or even if you're not, this might really get you into the arts, you can come along on Monday night to the St. Peter's Town Hall, where you'll see a fantastic art exhibition called To Tell Another Story, which follows the stories of refugees to Australia, and in particular to Adelaide. So please come along for that. If you forget any of those details, you can go to the website AustralianRefugee.net. Thank you all very much for attending tonight. We hope to see you at another ARA event, and thank you, of course, to Sami Shah. Good evening.